This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
Hello and welcome to Heritage Matters, a programme brought to you by the Southern Heritage Trust and sponsored by Heritage New Zealand. This week, Bill Southworth talks to Joe Gaylor concerning the demolition of an historic Stuart Street building. And he then interviews Councillor Sophie Barker on how such things could be stopped in the future. And finally, Gregor Campbell tells us about how dirty and unhygienic early Dunedin streets used to be. An historic house in Upper Stuart Street, opposite the old Technical College, designed by distinguished architect Edwin Anscombe, looks like it'll now be demolished. This has shocked people who value the heritage look of Dunedin, and who say the street will never look the same. Bill Southworth asks Southern Heritage Chair Joe Gaylor for her reaction.
I was shocked because we had taken a lot of time to submit on the earlier proposal, and then we got an email through from the DCC telling us that it had been non-notified, it was a done deal, and it was going to be demolished. It didn't even need a demolition permit, for heaven's sakes.
To an outsider, it seems quite remarkable that they could go ahead with something like this and simply not have to tell people. Is that a weakness in our regulations, do you think?
Yeah, it's a massive weakness, actually, and we've been calling that out for some time now, that we don't think that there are adequate protections or teeth in our district plan to prevent this type of demolition from occurring. There's two things at play here. One is the zoning, is the residential 2, residential 3 zoning, which allows for intensification right in the heart of the area where most of our rich heritage actually sits.
But of course, Joe, we have a housing crisis in New Zealand, largely because there aren't enough houses. Isn't there a real problem there if they can't build 30 apartments?
Yeah, I've just found out today those apartments are 1 and 2 bedroom shoebox apartments. They'll be very small. I don't know if that's quality housing in the long run. I think that in the future we're going to look at that structure, and I've seen images of it. It's pretty bland, pretty boring. We're going to look at it and not see it as a healthy housing in the future, and much quicker future than what's occurred with some of our heritage buildings, which have really lasted the distance. But sadly now, through efforts of developers such as the one that owns that property in Stuart Street, which has just allowed that building just to sit there for, I don't know, a year or two and become overgrown and let windows be smashed, etc. The old story of demolition by neglect, kind of makes it more appealing and as if, look, we should really just pull this old house down. It's not adding anything to the streetscape, and let's put up some lovely apartments. But in actual fact, the reality is, we won't even look twice at those apartments in 10, 20 years' time.
Isn't it also rather strange changing the look of that area? I mean, opposite you've got the lovely old building, the Tech College, and now you're going to have a modern multi-storied apartment building straight across the road. Won't that look a bit strange?
It look very odd, and it highlights the anomaly of the heritage precinct system as well, when we know that there's a heritage precinct just metres away in York Place. In fact, the property bounds both York Place and Stuart Street, and in fact we see it as a very strange anomaly indeed that large corner site was not included as part of that heritage precinct. And we know that the council recognised that that property also has heritage values. So we've kind of got a lot of questions in our head at the moment, not being answered, I have to say, as to why that property wasn't on the list for a start, even that it wasn't Heritage New Zealand listed. And I realise that they have their own resourcing issues, and as does the listing process as a whole. The questions are, why wasn't special consideration given for this building, given that the council was already acknowledging that it had heritage values, and just going by the sort of rule of planning law, which feels like a loophole that can be exploited.
Isn't this a really bad precedent for Dunedin in the sense that we've got hundreds of old historic houses that are not on heritage lists? Could many of them be bold?
Yeah, they're all sitting pretty right now, just sitting ducks in our view. And I know a little bit of the history of the list, that it was compiled for the most part some 30 years ago. They weren't seen as threatened, so that list has not been developed for more than 30 years and included those residential houses, which we're now seeing are at risk due to the direct conflict of having a higher intensity residential zone put into those suburbs. So you can actually see how it's the perfect storm for our heritage homes.
So what options do you have now to stop this sort of thing happening in the future?
The council has asked if our group can come on a planning group that looks at a possible, tweaks and adjustments to the district plan. Of course, last time that happened, we were opposed by a planning company, Patterson Pitts, which overturned a key provision that we had put into the district plan, which would have helped. I don't think it would have solved all the problems, but it certainly would have helped. We don't have deep pockets like some of these commercial companies do and consultants do. And to force it all the way to the Environment Court, and often you need lawyers and the like. So, yeah, I'm hopeful, but I'm not, jumping for joy at this point. The proof will be in the pudding. And what I think we really need, though, more than just us being invited onto a group and tweaks and whatnot being made to the district plan, is actually a high-level commitment to heritage in the city. And I believe that has to come from the mayor and the chief executive and other senior staff, that actually let's not beat around the bush here. Heritage is really important to Dunedin, and we should be doing everything we can across every single activity of council to try to promote it. We can't just have the Heritage Fund doing one thing and giving money for heritage restoration and renovations. We also believe our planning laws should also be marrying up with that laudable goal, which is to protect our heritage overall and to be loud and proud about it.
You've been listening to Joe Gaylor, who is chair of the Southern Heritage Trust.
Councillor Sophie Barker is chair of the Dunedin City Council Heritage Committee. She was opposed to the demolition of the Edmund Anscombe House, but admits the council did not have the authority to stop an unnotified destruction of the building.
Totally shocking. I mean, it is gut-wrenching to lose another beautiful building in the city. Just terrible, because it's so beautiful. It's such a landmark and everybody drives past it every day. And that's one of the really problematic things that's happening in the city, is not enough protection for heritage.
Do you know, a lot of people listening to this might find it strange that demolitions of buildings like that can be done without notification.
Oh, it is totally shocking, and we don't have strong enough rules. That is one of the problems, and it's about, getting buildings listed through the Heritage New Zealand. What does that take, about a year or something? Really, really hard. The scheduling of buildings is quite difficult because there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done behind the scenes. So one of the things we've been doing is the Heritage Action Plan over the last year or so, and I want to go in and fight for budget, which is really difficult in these times of a 17.5% rates increase. Fight for budget to get staff to be able to start scheduling more buildings, because that's how we're going to get the protection in. And then we also need to, we just submitted to government last week as well, is to actually put some teeth into it, because what can we do? Wet bus ticket? Not good enough.
But how limited are you? Can't you take some action on the thing and say, look, heritage is really important for economic and aesthetic reasons to Dunedin. Why don't we set our own regulations, good ones that look after Dunedin?
Yeah, those are the handcuffs of being able to make bylaws, and I think that's one of those real problems, is that government sets that framework for the legislation, and then you can set your bylaws within that framework, and then you have to actually have the ability to have teeth.
Well, you seem to be trying to move in the right direction, but how long will it take before something positive actually happens?
Yeah. There is going to be a challenge, and part of that challenge is around the resourcing and the prioritisation. So one of the things that when we adopted the Heritage Action Plan was to finish the tidying up, and then to put the what are we going to call them, a steering group or advisory group over the top. And because council is like an elephant, having an elephant baby 12 months before anything gets done, we had to tidy up a lot of our strategic framework. So last week and this week we've just put through a framework for our advisory group. So I am expecting that the advisory group stuff comes through very soon. Then we'll be able to set up the group and then prioritise, because I want to work in partnership with everyone that cares about heritage in the city. And then because we've got 35 actions, we need to prioritise, because some of them won't be as valuable as making impact, and I'm here to make impact, not to stuff around.
Obviously, your Heritage Committee has focus on this. What's the general attitude of the councillors?
Our councillors are very supportive of heritage, and they get used to me, because the other day I was reading out about the 850 scheduled buildings, the 1,240 character contributing buildings, and I love that we have a gross of Category 1 buildings, 144 Category 1 buildings, and then if they're not in love with the buildings, then what they can be in love with is the money that their buildings bring into the city, because over 50% of visitors come to Dunedin because of the heritage. Like, that is our superpower. And tourism pre-COVID was bringing $700 million into the city. Yeah, it's a big figure, isn't it? So then we could say $300 million worth of that tourism comes from our heritage. So I think that makes sense to people. If you can't sell them love, then you can sell them money. But councillors are very supportive, because it's part of the fabric of our city, part of the beauty of our city.
Isn't it remarkable that action hasn't been taken by now?
Oh, absolutely. And it drives me nutty. And one of the reasons that I stood for council was because I was really annoyed that strategies and plans weren't getting carried out. So there was the strategic framework, but the heritage strategy was 2007. That was the date of it. I mean, it was a piece of heritage itself. So I had to fight really hard for a really long time to slip it. And when I was briefly deputy mayor, I was able to get it on the agenda. So I had one item of power to get it through. But now we need to continue on with that fight.
You've been listening to Sophie Barker, the chair of the Heritage Committee at the City Council.
Our early ancestors in Dunedin had to put up with a high level of street filth. Gregor Campbell has been checking on a time when the city seemed mired in filth, but was determined to clean up its act.
It is fairly well known that, until modern times, Dunedin was not as clean as it is today. The sudden population boom as the result of the 1860s gold rush produced serious sanitation problems, but such problems had already been experienced, as reported in the Otago Witness of August 1852. Dirt and filth are thrown into the streets. Bridges are taken away for firewood. Holes are dug for sand or clay in the middle of the streets. Bullock drays are driven in the drain. And every species of destruction of public property goes on without restraint. Indeed, if any interference takes place, it is usually on the wrong side. The solution to such insanitary anarchy was, of course, some rules. And I here make some choice offerings from those enacted by the Provincial Council in 1855. Be it enacted that any person bathing near to or within view of any public wharf, quay, bridge, street or any other place of public resort so as to offend against decency between the hours of 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening shall be liable to a fine of 20 shillings. Be it enacted that any person who shall offend against decency by the exposure of his person shall be liable to a fine of not more than £10, or may at the discretion of any two justices of the peace be committed to jail and hard labour for any term not exceeding 2 months. Be it enacted that upon complaint made to any two justices of the peace of the existence of any nuisance in the form of any noisome or unwholesome trade, or any privy, sty, or receptacle for filth of any kind, the said justices of the peace shall inspect, or order an inspection of the same, and shall give 7 days' notice to abate such nuisance, and in default of the same being abated, the owner or occupier of the premises on which such nuisance exists shall be liable to a fine not exceeding £10. Be it enacted that if any person shall haul or draw by himself or his servant upon any part of a street or public place any timber, stone, or other weights, otherwise than upon a wheeled carriage, or shall suffer the same to drag or trail or hang over such carriage to the obstruction or injury of the said streets or ways, he shall be liable to a fine of 40 shillings over and above the damage occasioned thereby. Be it enacted that if any person shall drive or cause to be driven any carriage with any night soil or ammoniacal liquor through the streets or public places between the hours of 5 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock at night, or shall shoot from a carriage or cast any night soil, filth, or ammoniacal liquor upon the streets, it shall be lawful for any person whomsoever to seize and apprehend the person so offending without any other warrant than this ordinance, and to convey such person before any two justices of the peace, who are hereby empowered to fine the same offender, or the owner if the driver cannot be found, as well as the employers of the person so offending, in the sum of not more than £5. Be it enacted that if any person shall throw, or cause to be thrown, any dead animals or part thereof into any street, lane, road, or other public place, or into any river, creek, stream, or other water, or leave or cause the same to be left on the bank thereof, he shall be liable to a fine of not more than 20 and not less than 5 shillings. Be it enacted that any person who shall ride or drive through any street or public place so as to endanger the limbs or lives of other persons shall be liable of a fine of not more than 10 and not less than £2. Be it enacted that any person shall be liable to a penalty of not more than 40 shillings who shall in any thoroughfare or public place commit any of the following offences, that is to say, 1. Every person who shall suffer to be at large any unmuzzled ferocious dog, or set on or urge any dog to attack, worry, or put fear into any person, horse, or other animal. 2. Every person who by negligence or ill usage in driving cattle shall cause any mischief to be done by such cattle, or shall in any wise misbehave himself in the driving or management of such cattle, and also every person not being hired or employed to drive such cattle who shall wantonly pelt, drive, or hurt such cattle. 3. Every person who shall wilfully damage any building, wall, fence, paling, fixture, or appendage thereunto, or who shall steal or wilfully damage any tree, shrub, or other plant, or any seat in any walk, park, or garden. 4. Every person who shall distribute or offer for sale or exhibit any profane, indecent, or obscene book, paper, print, drawing, painting, or representation, or sing any profane, indecent, or obscene song or ballad, or write or draw any indecent or obscene word, figure, or representation, or use any profane, indecent, or obscene language to the annoyance of the inhabitants or passengers. 5. Every person who shall use any threatening, abusive, or insulting words in the presence or hearing of any constable, or behave himself so as to provoke a breach of the peace, or whereby the passage along the street may be obstructed by causing a crowd to collect or otherwise. 6. Every person who shall wilfully disturb any inhabitant by ringing any doorbell, knocking at any door, or who shall deface, injure, or remove any doorplate, bell, knocker, lamp, or signboard. Be it enacted that in case any person shall lodge any information before any justice of the peace for any offence by which he was not personally aggrieved, and shall afterwards, directly or indirectly, receive any sum of money or other reward for compounding, delaying, or withdrawing the information, he shall be liable to a penalty of not more than £10. The making of rules is a useful thing. Ensuring their observation is another thing. A few years later, in 1860, the colonist of Nelson received this report from the southern town. More than once, attention has been called, both by ourselves and our contemporary, to the state of Dunedin streets. This is to many of us a most important practical subject. We listen with interest to the information which some of our older settlers give of the state of Dunedin some 5 or 10 years ago. We are told of persons sinking knee-deep and of women fairly getting stuck in the middle of the street and having to be dragged out by force of arms. These days are gone, we trust, but it is well to chronicle them, and we hope that in the early files of the witness may be found a faithful record of such events. Dunedin, however, has even now very little to boast of. Some streets are almost, if not quite, impassable, and we have noted occasionally in our columns the melancholy cry of some poor unfortunate whose store or dwelling house is unhappily situated in one of those side streets which the town board has made the worse for mending. But there are other and more serious matters to which we invite attention, and which the members of the town board must see, unless their brains as muddy as our streets, call for immediate action. The grand jury at our last session called the attention of the judge, and through him of the government, to the want of sewerage in the town, especially about McLagan Street, Rattray Street, etc. It is time something were done on the matter. The inhabitants in that neighbourhood have suffered severely from the want of proper drainage, and it is not many months since a number of persons residing about the junction of Rattray and McLagan Streets waited upon the town board to tell them that there was a great deal of sickness and even a case of death in their locality, attributable to some extent, as they seem to think, to the accumulation of filth and impurities around them. It is believed by good authorities that unless something is soon done in the matter of sewerage, Dunedin, and especially the locality above indicated, will become very unhealthy. This state of matters ought not to be allowed to continue, for human life is too precious to be trifled with. We have not left our native shores to have our families poisoned in Dunedin by impure air generated from slaughterhouses and other receptacles of filth which ought to be swept away. There is far too much apathy in this matter on the part of the police. Gastric and other fevers have prevailed to a very considerable extent lately. Is not much of this to be attributed to causes which a little trouble and expense in cleansing and draining would remove? It is true, nevertheless, that a good deal of suffering and sickness is brought upon people by their own want of cleanliness, and consequent comfort which they themselves alone can obviate, but which no government or board can reach, although this is to be regretted, as these persons, by introducing and fostering disease, endanger their neighbours as well as themselves. We hear of cases in which rooms and houses are fearfully overcrowded, not from the poverty of the inmates, but from a foolish and expensive parsimony, which has cost already in many cases far more than it has saved, and which will continue to enfeeble the body, dispirit the mind, support the doctor, and, if not altered, in some cases, as we fear it has already done, end in death. It has been well remarked that cleanliness is next to godliness. We profess to be a godly, moral people. Let us also be cleanly in our streets and our houses, and we may hope for health and happiness for years to come. The year after this report, gold was discovered in Otago, and things became much worse. This has been, you could say, a load of old rubbish. Next month, a report on the early superannuation schemes for Dunedin's boot and shoemakers, which will be a load of old cobblers. I'm Gregor Campbell for Heritage Matters.
The award-winning Heritage Matters is broadcast on the first Monday of each month at 9:30am and replayed on the following Sunday at 7pm. There are further replays on the third week of the month, Thursday at 1pm and Sunday at 7pm. Or you can listen as a podcast from the Otago Access Radio website at oar.org.nz.
As Aotearoa New Zealand's national heritage agency, Heritage New Zealand Pohere Taonga is proud to sponsor Heritage Matters. Celebrate our heritage by becoming a member to visit more than 20 heritage places we care for across the motu for free. You'll receive a subscription to our award-winning magazine, exclusive member events, and free or discounted admission to over 1,000 international heritage places. Support the heritage of Aotearoa New Zealand. Check out visitheritage.co.nz.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.